Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at Adobe Media Encoder. Adobe Media Encoder is kind of like a jackknife for video codecs. You can transcode videos from one format to the next. Now I'm using Adobe Media Encoder on the Mac platform, so there are some things that are limited on this platform, and the same would be true on the PC platform. Some video codecs don't work on the PC platform and some don't work on the Mac platform. For example, Microsoft has a lot of proprietary video formats, including .avi, which is a very old format that still exists, and some applications on the PC platform still export to the AVI format, and that format is difficult to transcode on the Mac platform, and vice versa. So an MOV file you might not be able to transcode that on the PC platform because the encoding language that's built into these formats isn't available in the operating system. So you might have to get additional software to do that transcoding. Now, what I mean by transcoding is, take a video in a particular format and make it into another format. So let's take a look at Adobe Media Encoder. The Media Encoder is broken up into a couple of different panes here. You can see I have a media browser, a preset browser, and then this is the main work area, the queue area, and then the encoding area. So I never use these two sections over here. I just focus on this section because this is where you're going to do all of your work. The process for adding movies to the Media Encoder, you can either drag them from your desktop into the encoder space. Notice what it just did there. It read the video format. It's reading the video format, and then it recognizes it, and then it's put into this queue. Now you can have as many movies as you want in this queue before you start the encoding process. And the advantage of this is that you can duplicate and you can encode for multiple formats. So we'll get into that in a bit. The other way that we can add movies to the encoder queue is by clicking this plus button. So by clicking the plus button, I'll bring up a dialog box, and then from that dialog box I can go into any of my folders here and look for an MOV file, and here's one right here, and I'll just open up that one. So now I have two files in the queue waiting to be encoded, and you'll notice up here in the top right corner there's a small stop button and there's a play button. If I were to click this play button right now, it would do the encoding and would convert these MOV files into MP4 files. So right now you can see this is the original file format, MOV, and H.264 is the format that's being encoded to, and that will export as an MP4 file. So let's take a look at some of these settings. So the first setting here is the format. So if I click on the drop down, you'll see that we have a list of different settings. So everything from AIF, animated GIF, H.264 Blu-ray, JPEG, MPEG-2, MPEG-4, QuickTime, waveform. There's a bunch of different formats. For any of these picture formats, what would end up happening was each frame of the video would be exported as a separate image file. So you may need to do that to export from one video program into another that doesn't support that particular file type. H.264 right now has the best compression method for the web. So if you're doing stuff for the web, you're doing stuff for YouTube, you're doing stuff for Vimeo, then that will be your target video format. If you're doing stuff that is for production, you may use Apple ProRes, or you may use the MOV format for anything that you're doing on Final Cut Pro, let's say, or maybe you're doing stuff in Adobe Premiere, so you would use those formats. So those would be higher end formatting. If we actually click on this, you'll see this dialog box that comes up with all the export settings, and we can get into the details here, but I'm just going to close this for a second. The next thing we're going to see is a preset, and from the preset dropdown there are several presets. So when it says match source, it's matching the source of the original video file. So if the video file is 1920 by 1080, it will retain that size. If it has a specific bit rate, it's going to retain that as well. But notice we have some additional options like Facebook, Twitter, mobile. We have the standard video formats, 1080, 4K, 720, and 480. We also have Vimeo and we have YouTube. In this particular case, I'm using the Vimeo 720. But we can use these formats in multiple ways. Again, if I click on this link, it will bring me to the export settings dialog box so I can get more granular. So let's say, for example, I want this one to be 720, but I want this one to be 1080. So you can do that just from the presets. And these presets are also available here in this preset browser, so you can take a look at that. The last setting here is the output file. So where is this file going to go once it's done encoding? So when you click on that, it'll allow you to save as, and I'll just put these on my desktop for now, and I'll just click save. And that is only for that one, so I'll do the same here, and I'll just choose my desktop, and I'll click save. Again, you can have multiple video files in the media encoder. You don't have to do one at a time, and it will encode them one after another. That's what a queue is, and then when it's complete, it will give you that feedback. All right, so let's take a look at the overall settings, and let's get some more granular information. So if I go into the export settings itself, you'll see that we have these tabs. So we have effects, we have video, we have audio, multiplexer, captions, and publish. So there's different ways to push this to Adobe Creative Cloud, to an FTP server, to Adobe Stock, right? We're not going to be doing that here. We're just interested in the video and the audio settings. You have these checkbox here for export video and export audio. If your video doesn't include audio, you don't need to include audio, so you would uncheck that. The output name, as we saw before, is the name of the file. And if you click on the output name, it will allow you to set the destination for where the file is going to go once it's encoded. Now, if you look through the specific settings for video, this setting is basic video settings, match source. It's 1280 by 720. The frame rate is 30 frames per second. It's going to use square pixels. Hardware encoding, the profile is set to high and the level is 4.2. Notice we can adjust all these things. We can do software encoding or hardware encoding. Hardware encoding will use the GPS on your CPU in order to do the processing rather than having the software do all of the processing. So that's the difference. The GPU, I should say, not GPS. And then the profile, you have different choices here. And if we take a look at the audio settings are set to AAC, or it could be MPEG. And this is a pretty high sample rate. It's the highest sample rate if you want it to sample down. And the whole point of this is to transcode the file and to make it smaller for web delivery formats. So sometimes you might want to change this to 22 Hertz instead of 48,000 Hertz. And sometimes you might want to change this from stereo to mono. All those things will make the file sizes smaller. You have some additional settings down here in this lower section. Use maximum render quality. That will take a longer time for it to render. Over on the left-hand side, you can see a play bar, and you can actually scrub through the video. You can also trim so that if I wanted to, I won't export the entire video. I'll only export what I have selected here. Okay? So that's another way that you can do it. This is an in point, and this is the out point. So you can adjust for that as well. So I'm happy with these settings. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The other thing that I want to show you is if I go ahead and click on this one, notice that I have a plus to add. I have a minus to remove, so if I wanted to get rid of this, I could get rid of it. But I also have this to duplicate. So let's say I have Vimeo 1080. If I wanted to add another setting here for Vimeo 720, and then again, if I want to duplicate that, and maybe I'll do Vimeo 480. So now I have these three formats. Let's say that I needed to compress the file. It was too big, and I wanted to make sure that it's in the right size so that it will play faster over the web, so I can transcode for these formats. Okay. So once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and click this play button, and the encoder will go through its process. And depending on the length of the video and the size of the video, it's either going to go really, really fast, or it's going to go, it's going to take a while for it to do its thing. Notice that the renderer here is the Mercury Playback Engine GPU, which I mentioned before. So it's taking advantage of the hardware on this particular MacBook Pro that I'm using in order to do the processing for the video. And you saw that that took a short amount of time. Once these files are encoded, you'll see that they're grayed out. So that means that they're done processing. And then if I go to my Finder and I go into the desktop, I'll see the individual files. So in the case of this first file, nothing much has changed other than going from an MOV to an MP4. So now it's much smaller. It's 18.6 megabytes instead of 500 megabytes. So, and then here we have the first file is going to be the 1080p. So, yep, that's 1080p. And it's not showing me, 14.3 megabytes for this one. The second one's going to be 720, and that one's 7.8 megabytes. And the third one's going to be 480, and that one's only 2.1 megabytes. Notice that the file sizes are much different though. Okay, so there's a difference in those particular file sizes. Okay. So that's the Adobe Media Encoder. When you're working with Adobe Animate and you're going through an Animate project and you're exporting video, it will utilize the Media Encoder in order to encode the videos out of Adobe Animate.